Welcome to Close Listening. I'm Zach Morgenstern, joined as always by silent co-host Ludwig von B, and I'm back with a review of a fairly new record by one of my all-time musical heroes, Cat Stevens, aka Yusuf Islam. So his latest record, which I believe came out in June of this year, is called King of a Land. And it's a very interesting experience for me because for just under the last decade, Cat/Yusuf has been experimenting with going by those two names. And I think the message there is when he first converted to Islam, he felt like he had to escape from the old musical world entirely, from its corruption, from its pain. But then he gradually realized that his two identities are not in conflict, but they're both beautiful parts of himself. The hippie that was Cat Stevens is very consistent with peace-seeking man of faith who is Yusuf Islam. And that synthesis comes together in this album, I think even more so than his other post-comeback releases, which certainly have religious material. On his first post-comeback album, and Other Cup, there's a song called The Beloved, which is like a rock song about the Prophet Muhammad. But on this record, virtually every track feels religious, and it's an interesting experience for me as someone who has been atheist for his whole life and often, wonders about how much I can relate to religious people, how differently we see the world. It's interesting loving this album, all the while knowing it's a very different perspective from my own. Track number one is called Train on a Hill, and it channels the tradition of gospel music. Think Curtis Mayfield. Listen, people, there's a train a-coming. And now that I hear this, I'm like, and Peace Train by Cat Stevens. But yeah, when I hear this one, I think even more so of Curtis Mayfield. And each verse has this simple, charming, beautiful feel, but then they all end anticlimactically. So, for example, the first verse goes, there's a train on a hill and it's standing very still. There's a chain on the wheel. There's a piece in the air, but it's headed nowhere because the earth just ain't fair. It's as if the message of this song is humanity can do a lot. Yusuf largely believes in us, but something's really wrong right now and it's bothering him. Track number two is the title track, King of a Land. And for me, this gets at what I, as an outsider, view as a language problem for the monotheistic religions. This is a song that, in some ways, is very consistent with the hippie-ish past of Cat Stevens. It's a very loving, liberating song, but if you aren't religious, something about it won't hit quite right. So it goes, if I was a king of a land, I'd free every woman and man, I'd let them go, I'd set them free to serve you. So if you're an atheist listening to this, or perhaps a person of certain other religions, that would sound like a huge oxymoron. You're setting them free to serve someone else. But I guess if you are someone who believes in a monotheistic God, you would say, well, no, serving God is not like serving a master. It is a freeing act. And so I just feel like historically religions have made the mistake of using terms like Lord, King, Master, when maybe they should use words like guide, salvation. I don't know, sources that suggest God is liberating and not just another kind of more perfect, more powerful dictator. Because I feel like those parts of religious language come from historical times when, feudalism, monarchy, etc. was taken for granted. Anyway, that bit aside, this song is a very enjoyable earworm. The moment you hear it, that simple acoustic riff gets stuck in your head. And I just love that Cat Stevens production, dominated by the acoustic guitar. So every new instrument that comes in playing a simple but appropriate riff hits just the right way. You hear that trumpet that makes you think of old time and medieval context, perfect for a song called King of the Land. Track number three is called Pagan Run. So I don't know if this is intentional, but it kind of reminds me of one of my favorite Cat Stevens songs, a bit of an obscure one called Banapple Gas, which is a song about a fruit/drug on a mystical planet. And music-wise, it's a nice transition from the two folk songs this song opened with because it has a hard rock sound to it. But, similar themes persist. And again, it might be kind of awkward for non-religious listeners. It goes, I was on the pagan run, as in I was making these bad choices because, I wasn't in the right religion previously. Cat Stevens experimented kind of casually with various spiritual traditions before settling on Islam. That said, once again, the song is an absolute earworm. It goes at the end, I took the wrong road, God showed me where to go. Track number 4 is called He Is True. So this one once again changes the musical tone to something more mellow. It claims the world is unsafe because it is duplicitous. People lie, and even if they don't lie, they have failings. They die. So every human is weak and untrustworthy in some way, and the message of the song, therefore, is that because God is immortal and perfect, at least you can trust him. Track number 5 is called All Nights and All Days. This is a somewhat bluesy song, but with a warmer sound than standard 12-bar blues. I don't generally like blues, but I like this one. And compared to the previous songs, its message is a bit more universalist. It's not pushing a strictly religious agenda. Here, Yusuf is focusing his anger on the corruption of politicians and his belief in the goodness of most ordinary people. Track number 6 is Another Night in the Rain. So one thing that's great about this record is that Yusuf keeps changing up the feel. So Pagan Run has this mystical hard rock feel to it. We get the very soft, mournful folk of He Is True. And then we get this one with an arpeggiating synthesizer on it. For me, it doesn't quite make it work as a song, and this is probably my least favorite song on the record, but I appreciate it when an album doesn't get boring, when it doesn't all sound the same. Yusuf is really trying to find lots of different sounds with this record, so don't love this song, but I appreciate the choice. And kind of like track 5, this will be less alienating to non-religious folks because it has more of a liberation theology thing going on. It's talking about the trap of poverty, with Yusuf saying, well, the reason we need God is because some pain in the material world is unavoidable. It feels like poverty and other kinds of misery continue to overwhelm us decade after decade. Maybe these people find salvation in God. Track number 7 is the very simply titled Things. This is probably my favorite song on the record, and it is a very bright and memorable chorus, yet its title is so unassuming. When I looked at it on the track listing, I had no idea what the song was going to be. This song feels very George Harrison-like, in that it kind of has a que sera message to it. Life is a mystery. Only God knows the answer, so let us not be judgmental of others. Good message, regardless of whether you're religious or not. In fact, when I listen to this kind of religious rhetoric, I wonder how different the religious and non-religious perspectives are. If the natural conclusion of monotheism is that God's wisdom is too vast and mysterious for us to possibly understand, how can a religious and non-religious perspective be so different? What can make religion alienating to non-religious people is when religious people have rigid conclusions that those of us not bound by religion feel they might not hold if they thought through the issue more thoroughly and weren't just dogmatic. But if your perspective on religion is we will never know all of God's wisdom, then surely that would encourage open-mindedness and opposition to dogmatism. So if you listen to a song like this, you think, maybe the devout religious world and the secular world aren't so different after all. Track number 8 is called Son of Mary, and I'm no expert on this, but I'm pretty sure it's a recounting of the Islamic version of the Jesus story, in which he is still the son of a virgin and he performs miracles. He just doesn't claim to be the son of God himself. I find it interesting that the story is framed through the lens of Mary's sorrow, even if Jesus is nominally the protagonist. And I guess this is a tradition in Christianity as well. It influenced Michelangelo's the Pietà. And I guess the point is that if Jesus is this otherworldly figure, we need this more worldly figure, this human kind of pain to connect to. Jesus can be like, yeah, I'm going to sacrifice myself for my God, and that's kind of unrelatable, but Mary mourning her son is not. Track number 9 is called Highness. Not too much to say about this one, just an epic gospel song with great strings and backing vocals. Track number 10 is called The Boy Who Knew How to Climb Walls. This feels like the most explicit protest song on the album, and it's another way for Yusuf to connect with the international Muslim community, as the experience of being bombed from the air is one shared by too many countries, Palestine right now. And while like all the protest songs on here, it kind of plays it safe in that it's not talking about a specific country. It's not really making specific policy demands. It is quite bold in its own way. You know, Yusuf in his previous life wrote the song "If you want to sing out, and if you want to be free, by free." And this song is kind of the dark application of that message. It says in some parts of the world things are not safe, so it's almost worthwhile to be a rule breaking, reckless child because maybe all the freedom you're ever going to have is in that reckless rule breaking because the war zone will take your life away before it's really begun. Track number 11 is How Good It Feels, and yet again, another earworm. I know what it's like to be loved, to be loved. You know, it's kind of like the neo nursery rhymes that Yusuf wrote early in his career. And there's so much going on here. There's a reference to Joseph, you know, with the many colored coat, who is Cat Stevens' biblical hero. In fact, it's where his Islamic name, Yusuf, comes from. And there's also a sample of Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake in there. The lyrical style of this one reminds me of what I was saying about track one, you know, in that the verses start out sweetly and hopefully, and then they suddenly end in anticlimactic pain. I know what it's like to be loved, to be loved. I know how well it feels. I know what it's like to have someone to love, to share the air they breathe. And I know what it's like that when they leave. And again, kind of repeating a message we got earlier that no one can be trusted but God because there is so much pain in this world and we must turn to some sort of higher, perfect eternity rather than looking for answers around here. And finally, the album ends with track 12, Take the World Apart. Probably the most happy-go-lucky song on here. Certainly a bit of an if you want to sing out feel to it. Don't know if there's a religious element to it other than the song could almost be sung from the perspective of a playful God, and then it literally talks about, you know, taking apart different giant objects in the world, you know, trying to dismantle all the sorrow. So yeah, overall this record sounds very classic Cat Stevens, and a lot of these songs got stuck in my head. I don't quite know what to make of his perspective in these songs. It feels like the faith both creates an optimism and a pessimism. It creates an optimism in that it does have a sense of a higher justice, that, you know, one shouldn't give in to nihilism. There is this ultimate source of peace, but at the same time there's this pessimism that says, well, no one but God is good enough. No one can achieve this kind of peace. No one can be trusted. You know, maybe religion also gets in the way of believing in certain kinds of earthly ideals that might, if we came together, make the world a better place. But yeah, overall, a very enjoyable, if interesting, listening experience. So let me know what your thoughts are on King of the Land in the comments below. I'm Zach Morgenstern. This is Ludwig von B. See you next time.